So guys, it's Friday, it's the 7th I think. It's 7th of February. We're 10 days out before we're leaving for Volrace, and we have a lot to do. This weekend we have E. Fabian Karlsson here from E. Karlsson Steel Design. He's helping us with some welding and all of that stuff before paint. So we're just doing the final touches now before we're putting on the filler and the epoxy primer. So, and we have Raino here with us. He's been helping out a lot as well. And what I've been doing tonight is I've been correcting the gap of all of the piston rings, because we actually noticed on the last pistons we took out of the engine it's probably been too tight, and it actually broke the pistons when we tried to remove the rings. So we're opening the middle ring up a bit and also a little bit on the lower ones, so should be good. Hard work, gonna try to keep you updated during the weekend, and hopefully everything goes well. See, we got a package from Tenaci Motorsports, and they sent us a new back plate for the 200mm clutch. The old one was getting pretty worn, so it's time to change it. And thanks to their M104 flywheel, we're actually being able to change the back plate without doing any work with it. So just pop the old one out, put a new one in, and it's good to go. So let's get that done and move on to next thing. As you can see, we just pulled the bottom end together, and now it's time to put on the cylinder head and get everything torqued to spec. But first, we want to show you something that we learned during this build, and I don't know if everyone knows it, so we thought we should share it with you. So, as you can see, this is one of the MLS gaskets we've been using before. As you can see, we have the holes for all of the cooling channels here, and we have the oil passing channels, and we have this is the head bolts, and this is the oil passing channels are here. But we actually noticed that on several of my engines, they started to go bad from the first cylinder and the second and the third, and the further back you got, the better the engine was. So After talking to my engine builder, we actually found out that how you control the flow of the water in through the cylinder head is depending on how big the holes are in the channel. Because, like, for instance, if the water comes in here from stock, you have a really good flow and pressurized water here, so that's why they have a smaller hole here, and then they go up in size in back. You see, this is a 12 millimeter hole, and this is around the 4 millimeter hole. So this is fine and dandy when you're using the stock flow of the engine, but we're not. As we showed you before, we're putting water in here and in the stock water pump hole, and flowing up the engine like this. And the problem we encounter then is that these holes are so small that we actually reduce the cooling level of the 1, 2 and 3 cylinder. So to prevent this in this engine, we actually drilled up the holes in this gasket. So instead of a 4 millimeter hole, we went up to an 8 millimeter hole. So the flow should be improved drastically on the hot side of the exhaust ports, and it's going to be really interesting to see how it works. So we thought we should share it with you guys, and hopefully you learned something as well. Now it's time to put on the cylinder head and get one step closer to Spain. One of the things that we are adding this time we're building this engine is that before we just had this, if you're looking down here, we just had the support girdle, and this helps shave off some oil of the crank. But now we're adding this. This is a plate from New Performance. So this will be sitting like this, and it will help the scavenge steps in the dry sump pan of catching oil instead of water, instead of air, I mean. So it's going to be sitting like this. So it's going to be covering all of the steps, so make sure that the oil can settle beneath this, and make sure we have a smoother and more even flow of oil instead of oil and air. So it's going to be a fun upgrade, and hopefully it works well. So let's go. Guys, as always, we're running late. Today is Saturday. We're 2 days out before leaving for Spain. On Thursday evening we put the engine into the car, we filled up water, we filled up oil, we did everything completely done, and we're ready to crank the engine to get the dry sump belt on. When we pushed the starter engine, the engine wouldn't move an inch, so we thought that maybe it was the flywheel that had got caught with wait a little bit. Is that it? We thought it might be a starter engine that was caught in the flywheel, but it ended up not being that. So we removed the complete gearbox, we removed the bell housing, nothing helped. We checked the drive pulley belt, we checked the chain, nothing was wrong, and the engine turned off fine before we put it in the car. After a while we suspected that we might not have turned around the engine after we put on the support girdle and the oil pan, and this seemed to be the case, because we ended up yesterday on Friday putting in like 5-6 hours by myself, ripping all of those stuff out, and 20 minutes left, Jimmy came and we pulled out the engine, ripped off the oil pan and checked it out, and it seems like as soon as we let go of the tension from the support girdle, the engine turned around again. So something is either wrong with the what's called like the main bearing caps, otherwise they've been deformed, so they're like oval instead of round, or something is wrong with the bearing clearance. So right now we're actually removing the whole crank assembly again, and it's, as I said, Saturday at 1, so we are like 60 hours from leaving on the ferry. It's gonna be a fucking tight one, but we'll see what happens. So we're gonna get back to work, and hopefully we still can make it to Spain. But as it looks like now, it's gonna be a really tight one. So we might have to reschedule the ferry to Wednesday and do an all-nighter, but we'll see. Let's go. After we realized that the engine couldn't move, we tore the engine out of the car again, and we checked all of the stuff that we could think of. We checked the bearing clearance again, we checked the bearing main caps, and everything looked good. So we changed the bearings just to have changed them, but we actually had the exact same clearance. So probably the reason why the engine was locked up was probably that one of the bearing caps might have been crooked when or like not aligned when we bolted down the engine. That's the only thing we can think of, because we just tore it apart, put it back together, torqued it again, everything worked. So the engine went back into the car.
Visste du det eller? Ja.
After the engine was started and we started to get some motivation again, we pulled the engine together with the gearbox, got the clutch to work after a bit of problem as well. So we decided to get the car down on the ground and they do a small test pass outside to make sure everything worked. But even on the wet surface, the CV joint actually popped and exploded. That was due to it was not tightened correctly, so that was part of all the stress, I guess. After that we got the car back in, and we actually noticed that the idle was a bit off. It was like unsteady and sounding a bit bad. So we actually called up Autogruppen, and he helped us diagnose the car while it was running on idle. We're heating up the engine so we could re-torque the RP studs for the head. Unfortunately, he and I came to the conclusion that we actually had to go to the dyno. Note that this was one day before leaving on the ferry, so this is around 2 AM at the night, and the day after was supposed to be only for packing the Vito to make sure everything is ready for the trip. So the dyno was not planned. Luckily we got a friend that is called Janne Jumisku. He helped us to transport me and the car up to Autogruppen, who helped us troubleshoot the car. It ended up being bad spark plugs. We got it on the dyno, it performed really well, but in the end it started misfiring again, and that was actually because the connector for 2 injectors was not completely clicked and actually started to misfire because of that. So after that, the car was done on the dyno at 3 o'clock, and the ferry was leaving from Gothenburg at 6:15. We had to be at the ferry, so we had 1.5 hours to drive. The clock was over 3, so it was a really tight one, and we managed to make it back to Gothenburg at 4:30. And then we packed everything into the Vito. We had 5 minutes to spare when we left with the ferry. So this was crucial, extremely painful. It was mind-blowing, but we actually made it. We slept 11 hours on the boat, and we were on our way to Spain.